I am a special education teacher at Rosedale Elementary.
I'm Heidi Robinson. I am a parent. My daughter is in third grade at Rosedale Elementary and experiences significant disability. She has Kabuki syndrome and experiences intellectual and developmental disabilities.
So I provide her special education services in the building and include her in as much as I can at school. So she started as a kindergarten student in my program, and we've been working together since. And that changes kind of every year, but our primary goal is how do we get Izzy into class as often as possible in a meaningful way. I think is our. Would you agree? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
As parents, my husband and I have always wanted Izzy as involved as possible in the general ed classroom, because that's going to be her life. I grew up with kids in self-contained classroom who experienced disability, and I never saw them. I was never involved with them, and that is not the life that I want for Izzy. And that's not the life that we have for her now. She's involved in our community. She is involved in Girl Scouts. She's involved in the school's adaptive basketball team. She rides horses. She does all these different things and has friends who has disabilities. She has friends who don't. She is just super involved in everything, and we wanted to make sure that school reflected that. We wanted her in the general ed classroom learning among her typical peers.
I grew up in Colorado, and my mom taught significant support needs for 35 years. So I grew up in a classroom visiting hers with students with significant disabilities who were already going to their gen ed class. So I grew up in an inclusive environment, so it just seems very natural to me. And I think where we are now is not just including kids in the physical space, but how do we allow our students to meaningfully participate and show what their strengths are in the classroom. And that is a really hard part of the job, but I think that's where our core work is, because Izzy may not have all the academic skills that her friends have in her class, but she does have other skills that I think are really important to bring, and I like that you talked about that recently.
Exactly. I feel like Izzy being in the classroom isn't just important for Izzy. It's important for her peers as well. Izzy is delightful. She is very funny. She is sarcastic. She is full of life. She is very authentic. She's very kind. She just sees everybody as a friend. She's willing to help. She's excited to help. She loves school, mostly for the social aspect, but she loves it, and she's just really enthusiastic about everything, and she has a lot to offer. So I really wanted to make sure that in the classroom, that her peers and her teachers see that, and they recognize her as a valuable member of the classroom, that she's seen, and that they realize she has a contribution to make to the classroom.
What were you most nervous about when Izzy started?
Everything. I was nervous about how her peers would treat her. And that's probably still one of the things that I am most nervous about. I still remember when we started kindergarten, she was less verbal, harder to understand when she spoke. And she moves slower. And I remember being at the playground right before kindergarten, and just the playground in our neighborhood, and this kid kept coming up and asking her if she was a zombie, what was wrong with her. And it wasn't the first time we've had kids ask, just what's wrong with you? And I didn't want kids constantly asking my daughter what's wrong with her. There's nothing wrong with her. People with disabilities are everywhere. It's the largest minority in the world, and that's another important thing about inclusion, is learning how to treat people with disabilities, learning how to show respect You don't go up to somebody of any other minority and just say, what's wrong with you? That's not how you treat people. So it's also important to me, like, that's something that the kids learn, having Izzy in the classroom. But that was something I talked to Adrian about in kindergarten. And one way that she suggested addressing that was she spoke to Izzy's classroom a bit about disability, just in general. Izzy wasn't the only member of her classroom at the time that experienced disability, and just about being a good friend and how we're all a little bit different and how we can be good friends to everybody. I think that's always been good, just to remind the kids it's okay to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are curious, and but also asking questions in a kind way, in an appropriate way, showing kindness, showing respect still. And
for that matter, I feel like adults are curious, and having not experienced a lot of kids with disability, there's a level of uncomfortability for a lot of adults, and that's okay. And I always try to talk about with my classroom teachers that if you're uncomfortable or if you're unsure, that's okay. I am here to help you. It changes a little bit as kids get older. I was recently talking with a sixth grade teacher, and he suggested that as kids get older, rather than having me or parents come in and talking about kiddos or students, that it may be appropriate to start having kids own some of that. Like if Izzy could come in and say, like, here's this, and this is why I learned differently, and then she's an advocate for herself, which is an interesting thing to start looking at. But it gives her a little bit more of a voice and an understanding of who she is. But also talking with gen ed kids about how can you be inclusive? How can you support that kid in your classroom? If you notice that Izzy's maybe not reading the same thing that you guys are reading, how can you pull her into the activity? Because kids are actually really resourceful and will go, oh, but I want her to be there. And they notice more frequently when they're not. And I think it makes kids uncomfortable because they don't understand why that kid can't come into the classroom.